Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susanna Suisuki. Coming up,
there's no sort of mention of the amount.
Time is almost up with COP29 negotiations. Also,
because the only way you can win is to knock your opponent's bowls out.
The Oceania Challenge rolls out in Auckland, and later,
great-grandmother was pregnant with my grandfather when the nuclear testing dropped.
a look back at the bombing of the Greenpeace vessel. With only one more scheduled day to go for the UN climate meeting in Azerbaijan, a decision on a new finance goal still seems very distant. Pacific negotiators have been frustrated at the slow rate of progress throughout the event. Those in Baku are almost certain it will go over time. Caleb Fotheringham has more.
Time is almost up for parties to agree on a new climate finance goal in Baku. It is supposed to replace the current $100 billion amount for developed countries to support developing nations with climate action. Sindra Sharma with the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network says it was disappointing to see the draft text for the target on Thursday morning local time failed to include a dollar figure.
The most striking thing about the text when you first encounter it is that there's no sort of mention of the amount. And because we're trying to negotiate the new collective quantified goal, not having the quantified element is really disappointing.
Pacific leaders have been calling for action at what has been a particularly sluggish COP. Palau's President Suringal Whips Jr. shared a local parable about indecision in which a man dove into the ocean after a turtle but failed to anchor his boat.
Caught in indecision, he lost both his boat and the turtle. We must make decisions and we must act. Our planet and our people depend on it.
Sindra Sharma says she doesn't know how the parties will land on a compromise.
To be really frank, this COP is real weird. Usually at this stage, when we have a draft text, we go into negotiation mode. But at this point, it's gone into more closed-door ministerial consultations or like bilaterals with different blocs.
Fiji's Deputy Prime Minister Biman Prasad says the $1.3 trillion being asked for by developing countries is a fraction of the cost of $7 trillion used for fossil fuel subsidies.
The public will know that the current political storms and uncertain waters have beaten back our leadership at a time where reassurance and hope is needed more than ever.
The president of host country, Azerbaijan, wants to clinch a deal by 6 p.m. Friday local time, but Ms. Sharma says negotiations will almost certainly run into overtime.
A lot of items are in trouble and they're very critical, so it's the full picture of what we're trying to achieve here. It's on mitigation, it's on adaptation. All of those pieces aren't moving together, so I don't see how they will be able to close on time.
Looking ahead, Brazil are to host next year's COP, but the bid for the rights to COP31 in 2026 is turning into a tussle between Australia and Turkey. Greenpeace Australia Pacific spokesperson Shiva Gondan says it's uncharted territory.
Turkey hasn't pulled out, which means that there is no process under the UNFCCC or the convention in sorting out how this gets resolved. We are still in the blind in a way, like I said, we don't know what's going to happen. But both, I think, countries and groupings are trying to garner support from others.
Pacific Island countries are supporting Australia in its bid, and Shiva Gondan says he hopes the world will be convinced it should be held in the region as the past several COPs have been hosted on the other side of the globe.
There's a Battle of the Pacific taking place at the moment in Auckland in the form of a lawn bowls tournament. The Oceania Challenge is a biannual event attended by keen bowlers from all over the Pacific. First up, producer Matthew Hutching went for a roll on the green.
The Royal Oak Bowls Club, a place you might expect to see people in tidy whites, focused, in silence, on the green turf. But it's quite the opposite. Above the bowling green hang the colourful flags of Pacific nations, and I'm surrounded by the lively uniforms of bowls players from around Aotearoa, Samoa, Australia, Tonga, Niue, Tokelau, and the Cook Islands. I find a table of umpires having lunch.
What's bowls?
That's a loaded question. It's a highly competitive game. That's what it is. And it's a mind game. And it's very skillful. Yeah. It's the most in-your-face competition there is.
In your face, it looks very peaceful out there.
Because the only way you can win is to knock your opponent's bowls out.
Bowls New Zealand Governance and Integrity Manager Martin McKenzie tells me it's the Oceania Challenge, a bowls championship of 4 days taking place in Auckland. The tournament includes 2 teams of under 26-year-olds, and Martin says the game's taking off with younger players.
It absolutely is. There's some very, very good young bowlers, and certainly even our Blackjacks team is now very young as well. These future ones coming up will be pushing the other young ones that are already in the top side.
And Tongan bowler Chris Smith tells me across the ditch, there's more than just pride on the line.
A lot of players in Australia get paid a lot of big money and they don't even have to make a tackle. Some of them making 130, 140,000 a year. Clubs in Australia got poker machines, sponsorship. So there's a lot of money in bowls over there. In the bigger clubs, that is.
Michael Johnson is the Chief International Technical Official. He says it's a logistical challenge getting all the nations together, but well worth it.
This is all self-funded, so funded by players and whatever support they can get from their government or their bowling association. So, look, it is a challenge. It's never easy, having to travel somewhere, especially offshore. So it makes it even more special actually when you see it unfold and all the countries and players are actually here. Makes it more special that people have actually really wanted to be here and they really treasure it as well.
Out on the edge of the green, I have a quiet chat with Tongan team coach Peter Thorne while the bowlers duke it out in front of us. As a complete bowling novice, I ask the man with 50 years experience of the game what the key tactics are.
So when you're coaching, are you getting some people who can really get in there and just whack all the other balls out of the way, and then getting others who are more like snipers? Or?
Well, yeah, you got to do it as positional. You got a singles player. It's very similar to like you say rugby. You got to have a good halfback, a good hooker, so a good teams event. So it's like chess. So
yeah, it's a long game, right?
Oh well, we'll be here. This morning we started about 8:15, and we'll be out of here tonight about 9:30.
Peter tells me at the end of the day, when the bowls are stashed away, competitors like to let their hair, or what's left of it, down.
The hospitality in most of the clubs, you always accept it, and then after the matches everyone gets together and has a couple of waters.
Yeah. And Peter says the generous hospitality extends well beyond the bowling club.
It's amazing from this here, they'll invite you back to their country. There's always accommodation somewhere. So their homes, we're called brother bowlers and sister bowlers, so everywhere around the world if you say you're a brother bowler, it's just like a clan,
Vanuatu has recently celebrated its first female graduates from the World Maritime University in Sweden. Mrs. Seiloni Akanete Tuakuru graduated alongside 260 other maritime professionals from more than 70 member states of the International Maritime Organization. The achievement is significant for women in Vanuatu and the maritime industry as a whole. Seiloni Tuakuru spoke with Grace Viva'ai.
What are some of the struggles you've had to go through as a woman, to get to where you are today?
Of course, that was the biggest decision in my life. I had to go through a lot of stress and pressure because that would be the first time for me to leave behind my 3 children. But I'm happy and grateful that my mom and my siblings are still around, that I get to leave my 2 eldest kids, the daughter and the son, in Tonga. Was raised by my sister Marietta and my brother Kim Si with my mom, and the last born was looked after by my husband here. So the first few months while I was in Sweden, I can't concentrate. Living in a small family, small country, to just the next day you're out there, you don't see your kids, you can't hear the screaming, the laughter, the changing of the nappies, the cleaning, the washing. It's just totally new. But like I said. It takes a lot of sacrifices, patience, and perseverance if you want something good in life, you have to face it. When I was there, I was thinking whether I'm going to make it or not, because missing home was also part of the thing that really, really pushed me back. But graduating and coming back with that certificate back to Vanuatu, I looked 14 months was was challenging but also rewarding at the end, because there's something bigger coming up and something better I can hope to, put back, contribute back to Vanuatu, especially to the maritime sector.
Seloni, you mentioned living in Tonga. What is your connection to Tonga?
I'm a Tongan born near Vanuatu. I was raised in Tonga. I went to the normal primary school, passed the Tonga High School, finished all of my high school there, and then fortunate enough to have a scholarship to be in Fiji, doing a Bachelor of Arts in international politics and policing. And often at times people are asking me, like, how you ended up in Vanuatu? And I always told them, we claim USP for all this, intermarried issues around the Pacific.
Now, where do you see the maritime sector looking ahead when it comes to women representation?
Maritime sector is often known to be male-dominated, but, this dynamic sector has been changed over the years, like, digitalization, the seafarer issue, GHG. There's a lot of issues, and women's contribution is very much needed. So, me being in the sector, I know that there's a potential. It's not just for men as well. Women can also be captain on a ship. Women can be, taking the leadership role. So there is no, barriers or anything to stop women to be part of any organization or even any of the sectors, generally speaking.
I'd like to know, do you have any advice for the younger generation of maritime students, who might be looking at wanting to get into the sector?
As we conclude, and also an advice to listeners to our session, I'd like to leave you with an inspiring and powerful statement from Captain Laundry, Managing Director of African Women Maritime Express, who happened to be the guest of honor during my graduation, which I still recall. When addressing the graduates, she shared valuable insights from her journey to becoming Africa's first senior dredge master. So she reminded us to captain our own destinies and take charge of our futures. So if you truly want something in life, you must work for it, claim it, and pursue your goals with determination, and let's steer our paths forward and make an impact.
Many people in Aotearoa will know of or would have heard of the bombing of the Greenpeace vessel, the Rainbow Warrior, in 1985 in Auckland. The sinking of the vessel on July 10, 1985, claimed the life of Fernando Pereira, a photographer who drowned on the sinking ship. But what's not commonly known is the work the vessel carried out in the Pacific in supporting anti-nuclear testing and anti-nuclear waste dumping campaigns during the late 1970s and early 1980s. The Last Voyage of the Rainbow Warrior is a new 6-part podcast co-produced by RNZ Podcasts and the Australian Broadcasting Corporation's Radio Australia. Host James Nokise says before that fateful day on July 10, 1985 in Auckland, the Rainbow Warrior was on Rongelap Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The crew were evacuating the population affected by the radioactive fallout from past American nuclear tests. He says the more research and investigation he carried out for the project, the more horrors of what had happened there he came across.
The more we discovered these stories of people's first-hand experience of nuclear fallout, their interaction with government officials, that just came right out of a sort of a 1950s, 1960s sci-fi horror film. There was a dread seemed to be underneath a lot of what we were finding.
Eve Burns is a journalist in the Marshall Islands who features in the podcast. She shares her own family story following the tests.
My great-great-grandmother was pregnant with my grandfather on Rongelap when the nuclear testing dropped. And he was born 2 months later. So the health issues that they went through possibly passing down to us. So we grew up with like, oh, be grateful that like you didn't go through this, you didn't get this, you didn't get that.
She says it's very important for people outside of the Marshall Islands to know their story.
You know, we're getting tired of telling the same story over and over again and reopening wounds that it took years to heal. And we continue to open those wounds because we want people to know what happened to us. And we want changes. We don't just want the U.S. to apologize. We want them to acknowledge what they did to us.
James Nokise says it was an honour to have so many people from the Marshall Islands and Greenpeace share their stories for the last voyage of the Rainbow Warrior. You can listen to it now at rnz.co.nz/podcast and also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple, and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā sui fua.